Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You're listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sangucci. That's me. Today's episode is a guest edition of the Startup Selling Show, and today's guest is Kelly Del Curto. Kelly is the Director of Sales, specifically the Director of Small Business and Corporate Sales at Lever. So we go to Lever, Lever.co. Lever is an applicant tracking system, and I've got personal experience using the product. Back when I was the head of sales at Blend, we used Lever as our applicant tracking system. Specifically, I met Kelly at a Modern Sales Pros event in San Francisco a few months ago. And we're sitting at the same table, we're chatting a bit. She told me she worked at Lever, she told me what she did. And I said, Kelly, please come on the podcast. And so she kindly spent some time with us today. In fact, she spent some time with us coming all the way from Toronto, where Lever is opening a new office. And so while she's based in San Francisco, she's now out in Toronto, helping to ramp up her team and the rest of the Lever team in the Toronto office. So we had to work really hard to work into her schedule, and I'm so grateful for the time that she spent with us. So just to give you a little preview of some of the topics that we talked about, because Lever is an applicant tracking system, as you might imagine, we talked pretty much everything about hiring when it comes to your startup and building out your team. So a couple of topics and a couple of the questions that we talked about. First big question I always ask to people is, what's the biggest mistake people tend to make in their hiring, especially when it comes to sales? We talked about assessments of candidates. We talked about the importance of the job description and how an effective job description can help you find qualified candidates, and how an ineffective or too general of a job description can actually hurt you in lots of ways. So there's a tendency to feel like, well, I'm going to make it really broad so I get lots of applicants. Turns out that can actually be a really poor strategy, especially as a startup when you're trying to build out your team. We talked about the importance of cultural fit and whether or not to hire somebody who's technical versus non-technical, somebody who has experience in an industry versus not having experience in an industry. In fact, Kelly and I riffed a little bit about some pretty unique hires and pretty unique people in the sales role, including an opera singer, somebody who studied at Juilliard, and somebody who was an actor on a TV show, and how those people have all been successful salespeople. So very non-traditional background for sales, but because, as Kelly detailed, because of the right process, the right interviewing system, the right questions to ask, the right way to screen candidates, turns out that you can find some of these diamonds in the rough, so to speak, and find really good candidates from non-traditional ways. Additionally, we talked about the recruiting funnel. And the reason I just said sales is because basically when you're recruiting, you're building out the equivalent of a sales funnel. And just like you should always be selling, you should always be recruiting. So even if you're sitting here listening to this podcast today and you're saying to yourself, I don't need to hire my first salesperson for 6 months. Or I've got a small team right now, but I don't need to hire my sales VP until next January. Well, the truth is, you need to be out there recruiting right now. And Kelly got really specific about how she goes about doing that as a hiring manager, and what some of the best practices are for going out and sourcing candidates and keeping them warm. In fact, she told a story about how one of her hires was actually somebody that was recruited for more than a year and a half. And so finding really great talent means once you find that talent, keeping that person in your queue, even if you're not able to hire that person or that person's not ready to make a move right away. So we talked a lot about treating the recruiting process just like the sales process. And as far as recruiting itself, we talked about the different ways and different places where you can be finding candidates, whether that's applications, people coming inbound in a way to your job application, where you should be posting your job opportunities. We talked about the value of sourcing candidates, where you're going out and finding candidates that you think could be a good fit. We talked about referrals, and we talked about the use of recruiters. And then finally, we wrapped up with a good conversation and an important conversation around diversity in your hiring process and women in the technology and startup selling world, and how important it is to consider those processes and those methodologies to make sure that you are, in fact, doing your very best to reach all of the possible candidates out there. And we dove into some specific strategies around increasing the diversity of applicants, the diversity of hires, and how we can all do a better job of making sure that the workplace is one that is inclusionary for everyone across the workplace spectrum. So really, really excited to have just wrapped up this conversation with Kelly. And my one ask of you is that if you're listening to this podcast, if it's your first time, then fasten your seatbelt, because I think you're really, really going to enjoy this particular episode. And if it is your first time, then just go ahead and subscribe right now on iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify or SoundCloud, wherever you are listening to the show. If you are a repeat listener and this is not your first episode, then my ask of you would be go ahead and leave a review on one of those great platforms, because reviews is one of the ways that our show is then shown and displayed to other people on that platform. And so if somebody's listening to a couple of podcasts and they're searching for stuff on iTunes, if iTunes sees that we've got a lot of great reviews about the show, then it helps to bump up our visibility on this platform so even more people can find out about the show. So nothing jazzes us more than seeing the subscribers go up, seeing the episode downloads go up. Last month was our biggest month ever, getting episode downloads and subscribers listening to the Startup Selling Podcast. Looking ahead on my calendar, I was looking at this morning. I've already got 6 more interviews, 6 more podcasts already on the books over the next couple of weeks. So we're going to be pumping out the content and pumping out the new episodes on a pretty regular basis throughout the rest of the next couple of months. So if you like this content, good, because a lot more is coming. And so if you would, please help us spread the word about this content we're doing. So last thing I'll mention is that if you want to get a little bit of help with your sales, whether you're recruiting and hiring yourself for your first sales team, or you're just digging in tactically and you're trying to do your own lead gen and you're trying to figure out your own pipeline and trying to figure out your pricing model, if you want to get a little help with your sales process, then head over to Sales Qualia, that's sales, and then Qualia, spelled QUALIA.com. And when you go over to salesqualia.com, which is our company website, there's a link there that you can click that says request a sales audit. We also call them a scale session. So you can go to salesqualia.com/scale session, all one word. And there's a little form there where you can just share a couple of details about your startup. And at the end of that form, what you can do is book in a call. It's a private one-on-one session where we're going to look at your current state of your sales process for your startup. Where are you right now? Where do you need to be in the next 6 to 12 months? And help you identify gaps and opportunities in your sales process to help you grow faster. And so if you want to get a little help with your sales process, just go over to salesqualia.com/scale session. All right. Well, that's it for the intro. That's it for the commercial. I'm done with my asks. Let's head over to the conversation with Kelly Del Curto. If you don't mind, can we just jump right in?
Let's do it. Cool.
I've got about 17 questions, and I know we're not going to get through all of them.
Okay.
But that's okay. It's not always the plan, it's the planning that matters, they say.
Yes.
So I've already done a little bit of an intro, but just to kind of catch folks up. So this is Kelly Del Curto. I'm saying that right?
Yep.
Cool. And so here's the thing. So you're the director of sales, specifically small business, and what's exactly this? Director of small business and
corporate sales.
Mm-hmm. And corporate sales, which is like your 4th job there at Lever.
Yes.
Because you keep doing more things.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. So I remember you and I met at one of the Modern Sales Pros events earlier this spring, and my first thought was like, oh, I know that company because we used them when I was at Blend as our applicant tracking system. So we actually, we kind of like, I didn't know this at the time, but I was like, wow, our design of our software is really cool and elegant. And then I went to Lever. I was like, oh, it looks just like Lever. They copied us. Oh, wait a minute.
Well, what is it? The imitation is the best form of flattery. So
that's
absolutely.
Right. Good artists copy, great artists steal, as they say. So anyway, so I got lots of questions around interviewing, hiring, metrics, process, diversity. I know you've written a really great post on women in tech. So I'd love to try to get to as much of that as I can, if that's cool with you. And so most of a lot of the people that listen to this show are founders, early stage companies, growing companies. Probably some of those companies are already using Lever, and some of them aspire to use a platform like Lever. And I guess the very first question I want to jump in and ask you about, because I know that you and your team are out there on the field every day, talking to people making hiring decisions. What are some of the biggest mistakes that early stage founders make in their hiring process, especially when it comes to sales? and building out their sales team?
Yeah, I think, and I've been guilty of this as a hiring manager, I think we often think it's going to be a whole lot easier than it is. Um,
Right.
and, and so I think a lot of times we think, oh, it's only one person. I just need to hire one AE. There's a million AEs in San Francisco. I just have to find them. And what you realize is that not properly thinking through what qualities you need and actually mapping that
Mm.
out ahead of time, you can either get yourself really biased, or all of a sudden end up, a month into the process and realize that you haven't made any progress. And so I think the first thing is do your homework and do some preparation on what you're looking for, and realize that one hire is actually going to take something like 100 candidates. And you might not talk to all 100, but you are going to need to build a pipeline just like you build a sales pipeline.
Yeah, and I saw there's a really good ebook that you all have on your website, and I wanted to refer to it in just a bit, where you kind of have the different pull-through funnels based on somebody who's an applicant versus an agency versus recruiter. And I want to dig into that in just a little bit. In your response, you mentioned the qualities that you're looking for. What does that mean? Because I think a lot of times we say like, oh, I want, especially early stage founders, mostly they're technical people. And so they have this preconception of what is a salesperson? Like, oh, I need a closer, or I need somebody with a Rolodex, or I need somebody that can, help me sell. What exactly do you mean by qualities?
Yeah, no, I think that's also an easy mistake is, oh, I need a college football athlete that's going to, cold call until they're blue in the face. I think you need to go more fundamental. Ask yourself why they would need a particular quality and what is it about your business in particular. So if you're selling a very technical product, do they have to be technical? Yes or no? If they're not, where are they going to go get those resources? And then ask yourself, what kind of image do you want to portray to your prospects? And then also, are they going to work well internally and be a foundational member? And I have worked on sales teams at very small companies, 13 employees working in a garage. The kind of salesperson that you need to hire isn't a cookie cutter AE that you see a lot of companies hiring for. You need someone who's also going to step up and build process and tell you if you're not doing it the right way and you're not selling properly.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned something there that was interesting, which is customers' perception.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Tell
This
me
is
more
your
about that.
brand. Yeah. I mean, this is one of the first people that is bringing your message and your product value to the market. And you want to make sure it's someone who's going to be able to strike up rapport with your buyer, depending on what kind of buyer that is. And also be kind of an ambassador to what that customer is experiencing, because especially in the early days, you may have that value proposition and those pain points, but you can never stop learning what those are. And you need someone who's going to be thoughtful enough to ask those questions and really listen rather than just push the sale and try to close.
Yeah. So I was reading some of the posts that you all have on your site and some of the stuff that you wrote. And one of them was about being technical. Like, what does it mean to be technical?
Mm-hmm.
And I know that like a lot of times we want to hire for culture. We want to make sure it's a good fit. And on the other hand, we need somebody who can like step in and start selling right away.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's like you building your team there, like how big is your team, by the way, that you're managing?
Yeah. So I've got 2, soon to be 3 managers and about 18 AEs.
So you're managing managers now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then underneath those 3 managers is 18 AEs.
Yep.
And so how often are you hiring? How often do you have to go through your own?
It's not always be
process?
closing. It's always be hiring. Even when I have a fully stacked team, I have not stopped recruiting because inevitably I'm going to promote someone or someone's going to go get a job
Mm-hmm.
somewhere else. And you can never stop building that network. And there have been many AEs that I have hired just because I kept those relationships going even when I wasn't hiring.
Oh, interesting. And then you have things like opening an office in Toronto now,
which is where I am right now, recruiting. And after this, I'm going to get into an interview. Yep.
Okay. What's the longest that you've recruited somebody that you eventually hired?
I will not take all the credit for this because it was one thing Lever firmly believes is that recruiting is a team sport, and especially when you're a startup, it has to be a team sport. And so this was a lot of people, but we recruited the director of mid-market, who at the time was my manager, and I think we recruited Jess for about 1.5 years. A lot of just
Wow.
coffees and learning and sharing sales best practices and just getting to build that relationship. And then when it was the right time for her to make the move, Lever was top of mind.
And so was it that you already had that position open, or you knew that the position was going to be open in the next 6 to 12 months?
The way that Lever thinks about talent a lot is that there's always going to be particular positions. You're going to map those qualities and you're going to go and find those candidates and fill that pipeline. And then it's just in your best interest when you find really smart people that are moving up in their career, or that they would be an asset to your company in any role. You just keep those relationships going so that when they are thinking about making a move, you can find that role, or hopefully that role is coming. And in our case, we had a sales director position open for her.
Okay. And what are the touch points? Like now I'm like kind of insanely curious, because that's the other piece. Like when I work with our clients, for example, I'm always saying like your recruiting should be, say, 6 months ahead of the hire, because it's the last time. It's like selling. The last thing you want to do is be at the mercy of the market. Like, oh, I've got to sell this product, so you're going to do discounts. You're going to do something else in order to move your product. Whereas if you're selling 6 months ahead of where product is, you're going to be in a much more comfortable position. And so recruiting, as you said, it's like having your own sales funnel. So what are you doing in those long lead times? Like if I'm a company founder thinking like, okay, in 6 months, I might need to hire a VP of sales, or at the beginning of 2020, I may need to hire a VP of sales. What are those conversations like? I mean, because nobody has time for coffee, so to speak, right?
Totally. So there's a couple. Well, the first thing is that you compared recruiting to sales, and that is the best analogy because a lot of it is the same. And so it's like prospecting and nurturing a long prospect for a long close. So the same way I think about sales, where I'm always trying to provide value, I think about that in recruiting. So if I'm hiring someone like an account executive or a future manager, it's maybe providing mentorship opportunities. If I'm a founder, and especially a technical founder, and I'm looking for that VP of sales, maybe I'm going to them and asking them for some advice on particular challenges. And here's a secret: sales leaders love giving advice. They love hearing themselves talk in a lot of ways. And they also know that they're building out their network so that, you're going to help them out in the future as well. They might also just want to build out, a prospect in you. So, taking them to coffee or even just a call where you're asking them for advice on a particular problem.
Yeah, I think that's a good point I hadn't thought about before. Like when you're selling to salespeople, so to speak, they tend to be, even if you're an introverted person, they understand more wholly the value of conversations versus somebody who might be engineer based. So like, I'm too busy, I don't want to talk to people. So you can sort of leverage that and get that expertise. And one of the things that we've talked about with some of our founders that are trying to figure out what is the role, what is the job. One thing I've suggested to people is, well, go talk to 5 or 10 people that you think you want to hire and ask them what the role should be, because they might have a better idea of what the role should be than you, because you could come up with this great job description and everybody in the marketplace is almost like, I don't want that job. Yeah. It's like customer development. Like if you're doing product development, you want to show an MVP to somebody and say, what do you think? Would you push this button or that button? I guess you could do almost the same thing with like a job description or a role.
Absolutely.
And then get better information from the market about what the role should be.
And, I've known former companies I've been at that a lot of times when you hire your first VP of sales, they actually do write the job description, whether you realize it or not. And they want that, right? Any person who's going to join a company as the first VP of sales in maybe sub 100 employees, they're not getting into the game because they want a cushy job and it's all built out. They love the idea of building something from scratch. And so they'd want to say, hey, I'm going to sign up for X, Y, and Z. And oh, here's another thing we hadn't thought of before. So that's actually a perk to signing up as an early VP.
That's cool. So going back to we kind of got on a little bit of a sidetrack there because I was curious about your process. We were talking about technical versus non-technical, or talking about culture versus skill. And so on the one hand, whether it's a sales VP or my first SDR, I need somebody I can plop down in that seat and they can start performing for me. On the other hand, I want to make sure it's somebody, does it really matter if it's technical or not? Does it really matter if they understand the market or not? Maybe I'm hiring somebody in the HR tech space that has experience in the health tech space. So it's going to take them a while to get up to speed with the vernacular and the wording and how to think about the HR tech space. What are your thoughts, or what do you see as best practices for balancing technical versus non-technical, and familiarity with the market versus not,
Yeah.
so that you're getting production and you're also getting the match from a culture and team standpoint that you need when you're under 100 or under 50.
Totally. Well, I think you can't underestimate overall, no matter what the role is, the value of kind of a culture ad, someone who's going to encourage the people around them to do their best work, because it doesn't matter if you have the best SDR or sales leader in the world. If they don't click and they don't make people better around them, it's not going to work. But the way I think about it is I think about what are my gaps as a leader that I would love to bring someone in and fill those gaps for me. So I know the recruiting space. I've been at Lever for a while, but maybe I'm looking for a leader that has built their career around outbound, and that's like a new muscle we need to stretch. I would prefer that, and I can teach you about recruiting. It also depends on the product, right? Because our software, for example, we have sales engineers that are technically savvy and can do that portion, but our buyer doesn't need that most of the time. If you're selling into IT or product, is this person going to have weight with your prospect is a totally different thing that you need to evaluate, because that could be a huge miss if you get someone who can't relate to your prospect.
Okay. And how do you assess that, or how do you measure that? Because everybody looks great on the resume. If it's an engineer, you can give them a problem to solve. If it's a product or designer person, you can say, show me your portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
On the sales side, you're like, here's my resume. I beat quota every year, of course. President's Club, winner's circle.
Yeah.
Is there something that you all do, or that you see your clients do that
Yes.
is particularly good at assessing candidates? So
Yeah.
it's more of an audition versus just an interview.
Yeah. So at Lever, every account executive goes through a role play. Actually, even managers go through a role play portion. And for us, we'll pick a product that anyone's had exposure to. We don't expect that they know how to sell Lever. And we don't think that's fair because we sell it every day. So we'll pick something like Slack, which people use every day and is fairly basic, but could be technical. And we'll ask them to do a qualification call. And we're not looking for them to be experts on the product. We're looking for how they ask questions, because for us, that is the most important thing that they need to do. And then my manager role plays, I actually send AEs into the interview and have them bring a coaching problem that they need help with, and they run through a coaching scenario. So make them do the job in miniature and then give them feedback. I think that's the most important part, and see how that conversation goes down, because they're not going to get it perfect. No one does.
Mm.
But if they are resistant to that feedback, or they were really convinced that they did the best job ever and you thought that they flopped, that's where you're going to have some problems.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I've heard a version of that. I think it was on the Tim Ferriss podcast. He interviewed Jason Fry, the guy who started Basecamp,
Okay.
37 Signals. And he mentioned this with designers. He'll actually pay for a project, and he looks at the quality of the project, but then he also looks at their ability to accept criticism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he mentioned in the interview that one of the designers, he was particularly critical of the designer's work. And the designer was like, yeah, now look at it, I think you're right. Like, maybe I should have done this differently and that differently. And he's like, I basically was like, this is the person I'm going to hire, because everyone else was getting defensive about the design they chose or the color scheme or all these other things. So
I
being
find,
in that environment. Yeah.
and hopefully no one listens to this and tries to game the interviews that they're in with me, but I do find that really great candidates, even if they did a great job, they always start with something they could have done better. And it's just because they're looking at it from this lens of, how do I constantly improve? And they usually hold themselves to a high bar. And then the people who kind of flop that role play, they will get defensive, or they'll say, well, I think I did the best job given the resources I had, or I've never sold Slack before, and
Right.
You'll just start to see that mindset. Then it doesn't have anything to do with whether they can sell your product, but you can see what it would be like trying to help them.
Yeah. And so you mentioned Slack. So you're having your candidates try to sell Slack?
We'll have them just do a qualification call on, like, how do you collaborate, and they'll use Slack as an example of what they could be selling you. Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting. So why do you choose a product that's not yours?
So we sell Lever every single day, and we know the questions, and there's a little bit of bias there that we've also had. I've had 3 years of practicing different questions, and by no means did I get it right in the first 6 months. And we think that holds them to a bar that we'd be evaluating them in a bit of a biased way. And we want to keep it so basic, like, how do you talk to each other? And our goal is actually that they have a conversation just about how our business is working, versus, how do you like using Cheat Chat or something like that?
Yeah, that's really fascinating because it does almost force the conversation and the evaluation around the customer empathy. Like you said, it's
Mm-hmm.
like it's forcing me to ask questions about your business and not be all trained up on or done all the reading I could about the lever product.
Yeah.
Because
It's
then
like,
I'm going to default into yeah.
yeah. And also, I find that if you give them your product, they'll want to prove that they did all of the research possible in your product and it'll go product skewed. And I mean, if your job is, and what you're evaluating them on is their ability to comprehend your product, by all means do that. I just find that the things you can't really teach are someone's genuine curiosity and how they ask questions, how they relate when you tell them something painful. Do they go, okay, great, and then check and move on? Or do they go, ooh, tell me more about that. How can I help you?
So can you think of, I'm kind of curious about a specific example where somebody was particularly memorable in that interview and they're trying to sell Slack. Like, was there a question that you got that you didn't expect?
uh,
Particular scenario?
I mean, there's the good and the bad, right? One of my most memorable, and I ended up hiring her, she actually disqualified us and said, I don't think you should buy the product. And that threw us for a loop. But she just had asked genuine questions and we were particularly difficult in that role play. And we didn't really have pain. We kept telling her, no, it's something else. And she said, I think you have this other problem and we can talk about how to fix that, but I don't think Slack is the right choice. And I just had a lot of respect for the swagger she had. And then the particularly problematic ones, there was one where it was a 30-minute role play and they talked at us for 30 minutes and didn't even ask one question, which is quite the
Wow.
accomplishment.
Yeah, that's a long time to fill, to speak
Yeah.
extemporaneously for 30 minutes. Interesting. And what is your recommendation in terms of process before you get into a role play or face to face? So just like tactically thinking about somebody applies for the job, and we'll get into some of the funnel in just a couple of minutes, but somebody applies and then you review and screen. At what point, like, what does that look like? What does that funnel look like for you? Or what do you recommend? Or what do you see for your clients and customers that are the best performing funnels that
Mm-hmm.
help you both evaluate, sort of avoid too many false negatives and too many false avoid getting too many false positives? Like, what's the sort of ideal funnel look like for you all?
Yeah, so the way we do it is, we have candidates come from all different sources. So we might have pursued them, found them on LinkedIn and reached out, or maybe they applied. Or occasionally, some companies will have agencies refer them. We have a phone screen with a6recruiter first. If you're a startup and you don't have a recruiter or hiring manager, can take that first call. And if it's someone who's pretty passive and not necessarily looking, but they wanted to take the call, that call is going to sound a lot more like a selling conversation, telling them about the opportunity, letting them ask questions, asking them if they've had relevant experience that they would be able to translate. If they are more engaged and active and interested, then, writing some core questions down that map to those qualities that you're evaluating. So, if you're evaluating their ability to qualify, I ask them, how do you think about qualification? What kinds of questions are you asking and what's your end goal?
Mm,
And asking specifically for examples. From there, we do the on-site where I have them meet with a manager, myself, and then a peer, so an account executive. And then we do something that's pretty unique. It's called career trajectory. And it's a list of questions that ask them for examples throughout it's kind of top grading. So examples throughout their college career and first couple of jobs. Tell me a time that you had to do something you didn't want to do, but you did it anyway. And you start to see how people are driven or examples of them overcoming a challenge. And then we do reference checks and an offer.
okay. So it's
Phone
interview.
screen,
Well, the phone screen is first. And how long is that phone screen usually?
30 to
Do you cap
45
it?
minutes. Yeah.
Okay, so it's pretty long. Do you
Because
ever
trust
just
me,
shut
you
it
don't.
down after 5 if it's not a good match?
um, at previous roles I have at Lever, we believe firmly in candidate experience because that person may not be a good fit now, but they are going to go tell their friends, or maybe they will become a good fit. So I'll pivot that conversation, or if we both agree it's not a good fit, I'll set an upfront contract just like a sales conversation and tell them it's okay, we can hop off early. But for the most part, I actually will run the whole call for candidate experience purposes.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's interesting. Okay, so then you do phone screen and then the on-site, and it's just one on-site?
We'll usually do one on-site that's fairly long, or we'll break it up into two and just do the on-site, and then the career trajectory will be a separate on-site meeting.
Got it. Okay. And then from there, it's the offer
Yep.
acceptance.
Yeah, and I've
Okay.
seen at startups, I've seen people do, instead of a role play, a presentation portion to the whole team if it's a small group. So do something that feels authentic and is actually screening for what you're looking for. But I would not shy away from the interviews that ask really specific examples or doing something action-oriented like a role play.
Okay. And then you mentioned earlier about getting the whole team involved as like a team sport when it comes to recruiting. When the folks are coming in to the on-site, are you having people from the non-sales team interview, like whether it's on product or engineering or technical folks? Do they get a say in a sort of a straw in the hat?
I think when we're smaller in other companies, when I was smaller, we did this a whole lot more. Now as we've built out departments, we have those resources internally. But for instance, we'll bring in like a designer to show them the product, and that's kind of a way you can sell them and ask the candidate to ask questions to the designer. We've also had sales reps go and do a demo for executive hires so that they can see, one, how they sell, and then two, get an idea of what the product looks like and how it's being pitched.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Got it. So how often, or maybe a different question is there somebody that you hired that was really kind of like out of left field, like didn't have experience in your industry, didn't have technical expertise? I'm sort of like wrapping back to an earlier theme here where it was like, wow, for whatever reason, we saw their resume and it really didn't match, but we brought them in anyway, and they did really good on the phone screen. And we're like, this person really a good candidate, and we brought him in, and then like, wow, we never expected this.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious because I think sometimes there's this bias that we have, like, oh, it's got to be, especially in sales, right? It's like, oh, it's got to be the person who's got 10 years experience on the Fortune 500s and all this other stuff, where they have to have experience in our industry. I'm kind of curious if you had sort of an out of left field hire.
Yeah, I call them the wild card hire. And you definitely can't always have the wild card hire because that's a disaster. But every now and then you got to do it. And they're like, I actually love doing wild card hires, and they have blown up in my face before. But one of my first hires was someone who was actually a recruiter using Lever and had a little bit of SDR experience, but wanted to get back into sales and just really liked Lever. And I remember there were like a couple people were like, are you sure? Like we really want people with closing experience. And I was like, I think this guy is going to hustle. And I've promoted him twice now. And he's just killing it.
Okay. So didn't have the sales chops that you would normally hire, but because they love the product and they love the industry.
Had the heart, had the, I'm going to work really hard for it, had plenty of examples of overcoming really challenging things and building. And there were many bumpy periods that he went through and kind of created opportunity out of.
Well, that's cool. And how about somebody who was maybe just totally out of industry or somebody that never had sales experience at all? Have you ever had somebody like that?
We do this all the time for SDRs, especially. Actually, one of the folks who just hired in Toronto was a former opera singer and had plenty of examples of just like practicing all of the time, traveling, overcoming challenges, and just a ton of like extroverted, love to talk to people. And I think he's going to do a really, really good job.
That's really funny in that one of our clients is he's running sales for a startup and has no formal sales experience, but he's been an actor.
Okay. Yeah.
And he's actually had a role. I think he was on the show Scrubs.
Okay.
Yeah. Said. And he was on the show for like many years. And he was telling me about how he had it when he had to first find an agent and how hard it was when he moved to LA and all the stuff he had to do. And he was telling me these crazy stories on how he had to break through gatekeepers to get to the agent. He basically made this list of like the 100 top agents he wanted to have represent him. And he just went through this whole crazy story. I'm like, well, no wonder you're running sales. It was so obvious. It was the same process because he's out there selling himself, and he's just no fear of the phone. Like, and he's also an attorney.
Wow, this
so
guy
he's got
sounds
a law
amazing.
degree, and he's been I know he's an attorney and has been an actor. So like no fear of the phone, no fear of rejection. but no sales experience.
Yeah.
And so when we started working with him, he's just making very raw, but we could take that energy and take that experience and just sort of mold it. And within literally within weeks, he just all of a
That's
sudden a bunch of
amazing.
sales things clicked for him. So when you mentioned the opera singer,
Yeah.
I thought of this guy right away.
We had a
Being an actor.
Juilliard trained actor as an AE for a little while, who also had worked with my boyfriend at Optimizely for a brief period of time and was an amazing rep. The only piece of advice I have on the wild card is don't project. So what's really tempting is you project this idea of what they will be, and you
Mm,
fill in the blanks and make assumptions, and you think, wow, this is going to be an incredible story. And you really have to gut check, is this just a great story, or is this actually going to be the person that's going to do it?
yeah, this isn't Hollywood, right?
Yeah.
This is the real thing.
Yeah.
So do you do any behavioral assessments or anything like that, like whether it's DISC or zero risk or Colby is another one, in order to try to cross check and more objectively assess actual behavioral versus what is perceived or what they might put on a good
Good
faith
question.
in you?
Top grading is probably the extent that Lever does it. When they get hired,
Okay.
though, we do, and I'm blanking on the actual term, but it's like the color wheel. So what color are you? And each
Okay.
color maps to different traits. And we use that more as a way to guide managers into leading those people and also help them learn a little bit more about themselves. But we don't make decisions based on any of that before we hire them.
Yeah, I mean that's one thing I always tell people is it's a guide, it's a factor, it's a piece of information that should guide your decision process. But you shouldn't hire or not hire somebody just because of an assessment. You mentioned top grading a couple of times. What I've come across, so what exactly, what is the kind of secret sauce of top grading? What is it about what they do that helps you all to
Yeah.
um,
Well, and Lever has
tighten up your hiring
probably
process?
Yeah, Lever's probably morphed this, but the way we use it is it's a set of questions that you can't really prep for the interview. It's all experience based, and it's
Okay.
asking you for stories that exemplify a certain trait. So if we're looking for drive, it's, doing something you didn't want to do. If we're trying to just see what kind of qualities they want to emulate, oftentimes we'll say,
Mm-hmm.
if you started your own company, what would your 3 value drivers be? And it shows you what they prioritize. So there are these high level questions that you can't get right or wrong, but they are very telling because they're real stories. You can't do that interview without telling an example. And I think the biggest mistake I have made in interviewing is talking very high level about a concept and not asking them to prove it or tell me a story where they actually did it, because that's where you get people who are kind of professional interviewers and very good about talking about it, but didn't actually do it.
Yeah, I've had those myself, or you even say, can you give me an example? And they can't
They're
come
like,
up with a specific
yeah,
example.
totally
And then
blank.
you're like, okay, that's really cool. So can you give me a specific, what about, you think about a specific conversation you had? And you ask the same question 4 times and they still don't
Mm-hmm.
get it. They look good on paper, but they just haven't had the experience
Yeah.
they're looking for. And I think that's also good because you're your opera singer, or in my case, the actor.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's looking for the ability to overcome obstacles, like you said, the drive, because that's really a lot of selling, is just being creative and figuring out, okay, this is the condition in which I'm operating in, whether I have gatekeepers or lots of competition or product or pricing conditions. I've got to figure a way to go around them or under them or through them or just move in a totally different direction. So
Yeah,
anybody that's struggled, that's had to deal with the struggle, Juilliard, opera,
totally.
acting, they've sort of built that internal process to overcome this, and that can translate pretty well
Yeah, and
into
especially
someone
if
like you.
you have the resources to take someone like that and put them in a good position. I think if you're in a startup, you're a technical founder, and you do not have resources externally or internally to train them to be that great sales rep, you're setting them up for failure. But
Mm-hmm.
in my case, the very first job I had no sales experience. I was coming out of college. My closest experience was that I was a high school debate coach in college. But the company hired an external Sandler trainer, and that person came in once a week to train us on how to do sales. And with
Nice.
that, the people that came out of that company, a lot of them are in leadership positions or enterprise AE positions because they had the right fundamentals. And then that company
Mm-hmm.
had the benefit of getting us early, so we would listen to anything they said. But without that resource, they might just flop.
Yeah. Well, I think you said something that was interesting. It also said something about you individually, which is you were willing to be coached,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because even somebody who's not experienced could be uncoachable.
that's true.
And I mean, I've dealt with people that are very experienced and very uncoachable because, oh, I've been doing this for 20 years. Yeah, I know I need to prospect, or yeah, I know how to do this
Mm-hmm.
and that. I've also coached people that have 20 years of sales experience, and they're like, give me, give me, give me. It's just a sponge. They can never get.
Yeah.
I think, as part of that top grading, you're probably looking at coachability, and that's like you were saying earlier about being able to accept criticism and critique constructively. Say, oh, I can get better. I can always
Mm-hmm.
get better.
Yeah, giving the feedback live is one way we do it. We also ask them to tell us an example where they disagreed with a manager or a person in the past. And it's really
Mm-hmm.
telling. So if the example is something about, oh, I disagreed because my manager made me do it this way and they were wrong, but we figured it out and then we did it my way, versus they just had a different perspective and we sat down and we created a compromise. It's very telling.
Yeah, I use zero risk, which is an HR
Mm-hmm.
assessment, behavioral assessment. And one of the questions in that assessment, based on how somebody scored, is a similar type of question where can you think of a situation where you're a part of a team and everybody in the team wanted to do something one way and your intuition was that it was the wrong way,
Mm-hmm.
or that it should be done a different way? How did you handle the situation? How did you communicate that? Did you end up doing it their way or your way? Like, how did that go? And you get some same thing. Like, I've gotten some very snide sort of like, well, I told them it wasn't going to work. They didn't listen to me.
Yep.
And then you got other folks that were like, okay, well, I did my best and they didn't listen and it didn't work out. And then we all learned from it.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So I want to talk more about the kind of, we touched a little bit on the funnel. And I mentioned one of the many resources on your website looks at the different conversion rates in terms of how you're finding candidates. So you've got applicants, which are people that see your job online and they apply. You've got sourced, which I assume means like you're going on LinkedIn and finding somebody yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got people that are referred, which could be internal or friends. And then you mentioned agency, which
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming is another word for recruiters, right?
Yep.
So, like as a startup founder, if I'm a 10-person company, a 20-person company, of course I should always be looking for referrals. But how much should I be looking at this whole portfolio? Should I think of it as a portfolio of sourcing candidates? Should I just really, if there was one that I needed to focus on, what should that be? Should I use a recruiter or should I do it myself? These are all kind of questions that I get all the time. I'd love to get your
Yeah.
perspective on
So
those.
we've got another benchmark report that's coming out in 2 days, and I got some sneak peeks at the stuff for this
Nice.
podcast.
Inside
uh,
scoop. I love it.
yeah. So specifically for sales in companies under 100 employees, it usually takes about 38 candidates to get to your hire. And when it's early
Wow.
days, the biggest portion of those candidates is going to come from applicants. About 63% are going to be applicants. Now, you
Okay.
should be very smart about where you're posting. AngelList has been a really good one for small companies under about 25 employees.
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn is an incredible source of more quality candidates. And then sometimes you could find gold hidden in Indeed, but sometimes you might get a lot of applicants that don't really align with the job. So you have to kind of play depending on what the role is. And then surprisingly, not surprisingly, Lever, because we study this all the time, but about 20 to 21% are coming from source candidates. And what that means is you go on LinkedIn, you go to maybe some companies that you admire that have similar sales cycles, or they have really good training programs, and you are reaching out to those candidates and asking them if they would take a phone call. And we can get into it a little bit more, but sales candidates are very open to responding to those emails. And while it seems daunting at first, we actually see a lot of founders doing this instead of paying, a 20% fee to an agency.
Yeah. So a couple of things there to unpack. So the 38 applicants or
Mm-hmm.
38 candidates, how do
Mm-hmm.
you define candidate? Is that somebody who you do a screen with? Is that then they become a candidate, or is it something else?
Yeah, good question. So typically that's kind of your whole pipeline from the start. So it's at least resume screening that person before. So
Okay.
you'll have, it's just like a pipeline where you'll have, like 50 to 60% of those go through a phone screen, and then you'll whittle it down to the on-site. And really, by the time you get to those reference checks, you want it to be the person, and then you're making an offer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if I get 38 resumes,
Mm-hmm.
then let's say, some percentage of those I'll do a phone screen. It could be 30%, it
Sure.
could be 50%, it could be less.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's the top line number that you're talking about, applications. So I need 38
Yep.
applications to the job.
Yep.
Okay, that feels pretty low.
Yeah, and as you look at companies as they get larger, it's the number is 100. And so it's very possible that with, a lot of this data is based on lever customers, that they're being very strategic about where they're putting their resources and taking in applicants. And so you assume that when people are actually applying or being sourced, they really went out of their way to apply to that job, because that's not a very recognizable company yet if it's under 100 employees. That's the reason why it's probably smaller than what we normally see.
No, that makes sense. And so what can a founding team do in the job description to help with getting more, either just more qualified, more of the target applicants that you want, or at least cutting out the crap that you might get where people are just submitting resumes because it's really easy to submit a resume?
Yeah, I think that's where it's really, you got to be really strategic about where you post. So just like in sales, you can spray and pray where you're just going after volume. It's very easy to do that in recruiting and just post that job everywhere and, just try to get as many applicants. And I don't think that that's necessarily the most successful strategy. So with the job description, also recognize that really quality people are going to read that entire thing and you can use it to your benefit. So what Lever has done is we'll kind of outline the general company and job description, but then what we do to describe the responsibilities and the requirements is we talk about what that person would do 1 month into the job, and then 3 months into the job, and then 6 and 12. And so it actually bullet points what the job is. And also those candidates can say, I'd really like to learn that, or, oh, I've done that before. And we have found it's been very helpful for diversity and inclusion, because when you just put a list of bullet pointed requirements, often, and I've been one of these people, women will not apply if they don't meet every single bullet point. But if they read a job description as what they're doing, they can imagine themselves doing that job a little bit more easily.
Interesting. And that's just a trait of women versus men. Like men are like, oh, the job's in LA, I'll apply. It doesn't matter what it is.
There's been a lot of studies on this. I've never gone to space before, but let's do it.
Yeah, of course. How hard could it be?
There's a lot of studies that show that women will want to fill every single requirement before they put themselves out there, and a lot of times men will go after a job that's a little outside of their reach, and so that's why it's so important to understand it's not intentional, but you have a lot of sway in how you build your pipeline based on how you write that job description.
Yeah. And do you put any, so something we've done for like Upwork jobs, for example, when we're just hiring contracts, we'll put what we call Easter eggs at the bottom of a job description, where it's like a link to a video, like a 2-minute video, like a Loom. If it's a contract job or just like the internet research, like, hey, watch the video and then let me know what's the color I used at the end of the video. And it's like a code word to know that they've actually read the whole description and watched the video. So that's one thing we've done. And then the other thing we've done is, and I've done this for my own recruiting, we actually include specific questions that have to be filled out as part of the submission. Like ZipRecruiter and some of these other platforms, you can have like required questions. It's like open-ended questions, and it helps if somebody doesn't even answer the questions. I don't even bother looking at those.
We do questions at the end that are kind of broad, and they have to type a longer response, and you can easily see quality there. What we have shied away from is Lever's focus for our own company, and then what we preach with our prospects and customers is go for quality and not, I'm going to capture a lot of volume and then do knockout questions, because you often will miss, a diamond in the rough there that might have just missed that one Easter egg or was so excited that they wrote something. And so you want to evaluate for that and avoid just trying to get a mass of applications. And that's why sourcing is so good, because you can really pinpoint, this is the person and this is the profile. And then you write a really persuasive email about how their experience might match with the job.
Okay. And when you're sourcing, like, how much time should somebody spend per week or per month, even if they're not hiring? We talked about always be recruiting. Is it just like a time block, like Friday afternoon from 2 to 4? I should just spend time on LinkedIn and send out some messages? Is it that simple?
Yeah, when I'm actively hiring, it depends on how much help I have from my recruiting team. But right now, I'm trying to fill a management position, and I've been doing about an hour a day of sourcing, and a majority of my
Oh,
pipeline is sourced from me. When I'm not recruiting, maybe like an hour a week. And it's little things like you just find an AE or a sales manager on LinkedIn. I connect with them and there's like a space to put a very short message. And I just tell them, I'm
hmm,
building out a team or I'm from Lever, just trying to expand my network. But I'd love to have a conversation with you about a role. And
yeah.
I'm getting about 50% response rates. For companies under 100, sales candidates usually respond about 40%.
Oh, that's really great.
It's really high. Yeah.
So it's really just, yeah, it's just like kind of building that muscle. Like, okay, I'm on LinkedIn anyway, doing my sales work. If I see an interesting candidate, I've already got kind of a template, like copy paste, and then just send.
Yeah.
It's
And
just
then
almost like being on your radar all the time.
Yeah, and then you're just slowly building that. And then make sure to keep those relationships up, especially with the really high quality people. Like take them out to a glass of wine every now and then. It doesn't have to be about the role. It just can be what's new. Like, what are you working on? Hey, I have this problem. Can you help me solve it?
Hmm.
And then Lever has also like built in things that my recruiters use so they can build out an email campaign like a sales loft or an outreach and send on behalf of
Nice.
me because I'll get a higher response rate with my title. And that way it's automated. And if you have a hiring manager that just doesn't have time to do it, you can have like an intern or a recruiter or someone else on the team doing it.
That's interesting. So you're almost like creating a marketing list,
It's
but they're
absolutely a
candidates.
drip campaign. Hmm.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
And you can just like, hey, let me add you to my list. I'll keep you updated on positions and posts and what's going on here at Lever. And you just drip out to them once a week
Yep.
or once a month or whatever.
And then the
Oh, I love that.
key is that it has to be personalized, right? Because it's very quick for that to get spammy. And so we have
Hmm.
it built in where you have to preview your messages before they get triggered, but then you can kind of float in certain things that are specific to that candidate before it goes out. And then obviously if they respond to it, then it won't send them the second email if that's the intention.
Yeah, I mean, and all the marketing automation platforms are pretty easy to set those up. And
Hmm.
you could just tag, okay, these are SDR candidates, these are AE candidates, these are, sales engineer candidates, whatever. And
Yep.
just give them slightly different versions of the
Hmm.
same. Yeah, oh, I love that.
We have really
Really love
smart,
that.
really smart engineers and designers, and yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
it's been
No, that's
very
cool.
helpful.
Cool. So then speaking of recruiters, we mentioned them a couple of times because I get this question as well. And like if I'm a startup, I always feel like I'm compressed for time and I'm constrained. I don't have time to do the 2 hours a week that I should be doing. I don't have time to do all of the 38 candidate screening kind of things. Is there a downside or a specific downside or specific upside or both to using recruiters in your early stage and trying to grow,
As for
in your opinion?
external recruiting, so a staffing firm.
Hmm.
No,
Yeah.
I think there's definitely some strategic advantages. So, specifically if you have a really hard to fill role, engineering candidate, and you just know you've already tried and it's gonna take too long, or Lever will use executive recruiters when we're looking for executives because oftentimes those execs will only go through a recruiting agency. So I think there are some definite advantages, but I think when you are growing a lot and it's the same role over and over again and you're paying 20% a pop where you could easily do it yourself or even hire someone part-time to send some of those messages, I think it's very tempting to think it's a lot more work than it needs to be. And if you get good at it, then you can save yourself like 20 grand per person.
Yeah, like my argument against recruiters, like I've been recruited by recruiters and I paid for recruiters, so it's not that I have, I really care one way or another. But for an early stage company, it's a skill, right? You've got to go and figure out how to recruit people and get them on board with the mission and vision of the company. And if you're outsourcing that, is that the same as outsourcing your code base? Like you wouldn't outsource your code base, you wouldn't outsource your product work, you wouldn't outsource your sales. So it's one of the fundamental skill sets you need to develop, this muscle that you
Yeah.
need to be able to learn and teach to the rest of the organization. So if you outsource it and you're getting great candidates, you don't really know how, then when you do have to go from 50 to 500, it's going to get super
Absolutely.
expensive to
Hmm.
use a recruiter and you're not really going to know how to go do it on your own. So while it is time consuming up front, putting in kind of the reps early in is probably better in the long run.
Yeah. The other piece, I mean, if you are going to hire an external recruiting firm, you know, I think oftentimes it's this, oh, I don't have time. Okay, I'll just hire them. And it's this afterthought. Be really strategic about which staffing firm you choose. Bring them to your company, have them feel out the culture, have them run kind of a mock interview with you. Really take that time, because I can't tell you how many interviews I've even done or friends of mine have done where the external recruiter just totally ruined it for them. And it was because they're just trying to fill so many recs that they're not taking the time. But then there's staffing firms and certain recruiters that are incredible, and they're the reason that they get you such high quality candidates, and that's worth the 20%. Just getting you a ton of candidates volume wise is not worth it.
Yeah, so you gotta do the interview process with the recruiters anyway.
Yeah.
So
it's a vendor. Yeah,
for sure, makes sense. So I wanted to also spend some time, because obviously you're a woman and you're in tech and you've written about this. It was a really great article you wrote, both published on LinkedIn and the Lever website. And this is something I've seen. I've been in Silicon Valley for 20 years and I've been in sales for a long time. It is a male-driven, male-dominated career. And on the other hand, obviously there's plenty of women that are super successful. So like, how do you recruit for diversity? And because you want to have that balance while you also want to have the best candidate. And to me, it's a really hard question, because you want to be able to be equal opportunity. You want to get the diversity, and you want to invite more people into the sales world. My wife's an economist, which is like one female in the whole department. Whatever.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So she has to deal with this every day. So I don't know, like, what's your advice, especially if the founder is male and tech, and it's sort of this, culture thing, and I want to hire somebody who's like me, and somebody like me means that they're like 32 and white male.
Yeah.
Like it's like it seems like a really hard problem.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear your.
Well, I think you're kind of hitting on one of the most important parts, which is if you want to do diversity and inclusion the right way, you have to believe it, right? You don't sign on because you're afraid that what will happen if you're not seen as an inclusive environment, or don't do it because it's like all the rage, or because a candidate pushes you to do it. If you do it that way, it's never going to come off genuine, and absolutely that bias is still going to exist. But if you firmly believe that your business will be better being diverse, then that you'll start to emulate that through the interview process, right? You'll expose candidates to people who look like them. You'll have a diverse group of people interviewing them. You'll proactively source candidates that have the right profile, but maybe are from an underrepresented background. And then if you're really struggling to find qualified candidates that are from a diverse background, there's plenty of people that are just starting out in their career, and you can grow them within your company. And, a big reason we have such a large AE workforce that's women is a lot of them started here as SDRs and kicked butt. But also certain areas like San Francisco are becoming more diverse, and women are sticking with it a lot longer. And so you need to take advantage of when you find an incredible candidate. You just have to go after them.
Yeah. So we had Trish Bertuzzi, who's she's from the Bridge Group. We had her on the podcast, and she talked about a really great source of candidates is returning military, because especially like an SDR role. We talked about somebody who's been able to solve problems and not afraid of the phones. Like if you had bullets whizzing by your head, then picking up the phone and getting a no.
Seriously.
And, the military, the armed forces done a nice job of being more diverse, both ethnically and then from a gender standpoint as well. So that can be, setting up relationships with, returning military organizations. And just as just like if you're going to have a job posting on LinkedIn and you're going to work with a recruiting agency and you're going to do sourcing, like have a set of organizations. You're like, hey, I'm just going to shoot you job descriptions. If you know of anybody, if you want to post it and circulate it, then at least you're getting out to that audience, because those people might not be going to Angel List.
Yeah.
They may not be going to LinkedIn, and that's a way to help kind of round out your ability to at least reach that market a way that otherwise you might not be able to.
That's an excellent one. And, organization specific, giving back to the community, and then in turn recruiting from that. that's been effective. Lever's done like a women in sales panel where we'll invite people from all sorts of tech backgrounds to come listen to other women in leadership positions speak. And you would be shocked, like people that you have never found on LinkedIn, who've never applied to a job, they'll go to that event. And then you're also showing that you want to be a diverse workforce. And so you're building up a reputation. So a lot of times we actually, now that Lever has built a reputation of being a company that firmly believes in diversity and inclusion, we have diverse candidates reaching out to us because they want to be a part of that. And, they feel like it's something special. But you have to really build that marketing and recruiting brand.
Yeah. And I think as a company, you could also, as a startup, maybe find some advisors that are, either women or minority or both, and just use that as a sounding board. Like ask for advice, like, look, we have these 3 sales positions, and tell me stuff I don't know about how to reach candidates. Because if you're a woman, you've got a totally different perspective on, like you said, the job posting. It's like, oh, if I don't meet every bullet point, I'm not going to apply. Well, I wouldn't have known that prior to you telling me that.
Yeah.
So just having that expertise around you probably is going to help a lot just to become a much more emotionally mature company.
And then the best one is don't just recruit with diversity in mind, like build your culture with that in mind. Because the reason there aren't a lot of women in sales isn't because they didn't try, it's because they got pushed out, right? And being the only woman in a meeting over and over and over again, that's kind of what gets exhausting. But if you create a culture where everyone feels like they have a seat at the table, you'll actually retain that diverse talent too.
Yeah, and you wrote about that in your article where you mentioned you were in an environment that just was, people use the term bro culture. I was just actually on LinkedIn today, and I saw somebody asking about bro culture stuff, and it's I don't know, it's kind of frustrating that it still exists, and it's probably like even myself, I'm like, I'm aware of it. There's probably things I do that I don't even know that I do that to somebody else is like, oh, that's a bro culture thing. And I'm like,
I think sometimes, look, my longtime boyfriend was the president of his fraternity. Like there's, I was one of the people who advocated that we got a gong in the office because I wanted some more energy. It doesn't mean you have to eradicate all of the things that you also associate with being really fun about the workforce or about sales. There's like little things, like when you have a meeting, make sure everyone's voice is heard, right? Create ways of getting people's feedback, maybe in written form ahead of it so that people feel like they can speak up. Or, if a woman is speaking in a meeting, make sure your counterparts don't interrupt her halfway through. And same goes for male colleagues. I think those are the little things, or like very subtle sexual harassment. Those are the things that get to women. Like I could care less if you ring the gong every day. It's if you ring it and then you're, excluding me from feeling that because you don't think that I'm going to like it. That's even worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the interview side, have you ever, like, even as a candidate, is there something that, I know I don't want to make you put on a legal hat here, but there's like something really stupid that people probably do more often than they think. Like they don't think it's like something they shouldn't do, but even in the interview process that, they might be unaware of this, but it's like, oh, actually that's harassment, or no, you're being discriminating right now.
Yeah, well, this one's probably, like, I don't think many people do this, but actually I once was interviewing for a job where they were my number one. I could not wait to get the offer. And at the end of one interview with the VP of sales, it had gone swimmingly. He left the room and said, "Thanks, sweetie," and walked out. And I couldn't take that job. And it was one word, but it was just, and it's like little things you don't think about. It's just treat people as peers and colleagues. Even if you associate that person with like a young daughter or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
I was so bummed out. I really wanted that job, but I couldn't take it.
Well, I guess it's better you found out before you took the job than
absolutely.
3 days or 3 months after you took the job. So, listen, Kelly, you've been very generous with your time and your expertise. This has been awesome. I really appreciate it. I know that you're super busy. Here you are in Toronto trying to set up an office, and you're spending time here doing this. So you are in Toronto because you're opening up the office the Lever office in Toronto. So tell us a little bit about, if somebody's interested in learning more about Lever, or they know a friend who should be applying, tell us more about how they can get in touch with you and learn more about
we're always
the great
recruiting.
culture there.
So we've got an office in downtown San Francisco with about 230 folks right now, and a full sales team. And then this office in Toronto is growing. It's 20 people right now, hiring for every role you can think of at a tech company. And so, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always down to meet people and share ideas. Or obviously, we have our career site too, so feel free to apply.
There you go. It's Kelly, DEL, and then space, capital CU.
RTO. So, exactly. Kelly Del Curto.
Yeah. And we'll put a link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes.
Perfect.
As well. But I think if you just go over to Lever, it's lever.co, correct?
CO. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lever.co. And like I said, there's if you're interviewing and hiring and just going through this process, this morning, I spent about an hour just going through the ebooks and white papers and all the stuff. Really great content on the site. And then you mentioned you're going to have this new benchmark coming out in a couple of days.
Yes. Yep.
So all the more reason to head over to the site and check out what you all are doing. So again, thank you so much. Hopefully I'll see you at another MSP event.
Yeah. Hopefully see you soon.
Couple of months. Thanks again for making the time. If there's anything we can do to help you out, please let me know.
Thanks, Scott. I really appreciate the opportunity.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you. We'll see you soon. Bye. All right, folks. That is my conversation with Kelly Del Curto, Director of Sales in the Small Business Corporate Division of Lever. So listen, thank you very much for listening to the Startup Selling Show, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci. We have been seeing more and more episodes get downloaded every single time that we release a new one. We're seeing the number of subscribers go up. And one of the best ways to help us do that is that if you're really liking this content, please do go tell a friend or 10 about the show. If this is a conversation that was useful to you as a startup founder, as a early stage sales VP, when you're going out and recruiting, hiring, and onboarding your new customers, or your new candidates, then chances are you probably have somebody else in your network, somebody else in your circle that's going through the same thing. So if you would just let them know, hey, I just heard this really great podcast. It's called the Startup Selling Show. They had this great interview about recruiting and hiring, and I think you should listen to it. So please do tell a friend or 10 about the show. And then secondly, if you would, please head over to iTunes or Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, wherever you're listening to the Startup Selling Show, and leave us a review. Tell us what you like about it. Tell us what else we can do to make it even better. The reviews are one of the ways that people on those different platforms are shown and suggested new shows to check out. And so if you're listening to the show and you can leave us a review, that'd be a really great way for us to bump up and get some more visibility on those platforms so that we can get even more people listening to the show. Okay. So that's it for now. We'll call it a wrap. Thanks again for listening to the Startup Selling Show, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci, and we'll see you next time.